Welcome to Taller Together. I'm your host, Tamsin Lovell. One of the ways an audience leaves a little taller than when they arrived is if they've learned something new and fascinating. And I think you're going to get that stimulation from our guest today. We're joined by Heidi Erdmann, a Cape Town-based cultural entrepreneur whose career has shaped South African photography for more than 3 decades. Heidi founded Erdmann Contemporary and the Photographers Gallery, both known for building serious collections in contemporary South African photography and fine art, and for content-rich, research-driven exhibitions. She's the founder of Legacy Projects, an initiative dedicated to documenting, preserving, and activating South Africa's photographic and artistic heritage. And her academic work on national imaginaries and museums deepens this focus on memory, archives, and cultural history. Most recently, she founded and served as director of the inaugural Cape Town Photography Festival, which brought together local and international voices around photography, technology, and the future of the medium. Heidi and I have known each other for quite a long time as gallerists and cultural industry acquaintances, but through these interviews for Amateur Magazine and this podcast, I'm learning so much more about Heidi and her work, and it's a pleasure to introduce her to you. Heidi, welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us today. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you, Tamsin. Yes, it's for me. It's a great honor to participate in your podcast series. Thank you for having me.
For listeners who may know your galleries or the Cape Town Photography Festival, but not the full picture, how would you describe what you do today across Erdmann Contemporary Legacy Projects and your academic research?
Yes, I should quickly share the trajectory. And I had been a gallerist for 17 years. One is constantly busy. You're developing an exhibition, you're busy wrapping up the exhibition before, and you're planning another exhibition. It's a very, very full-time occupation. I really wanted to add more time in my schedule for research. It was at the end of 2017. I took this bold decision and decided, actually, I'm going to pause everything and I'm going to go back to university. And I enrolled for a master's degree.
Wow.
When I finished my studies, it was COVID and the world was shut down. I kind of asked the artists that I was working with at the time, I said, listen, just give me 2 years. I'll be back. And then the world was shut down, as we all know. And that's why by 2021, I sort of relooked at my career and I thought, well, I went back to university. Now I have more time for research. And I decided to go into a completely different direction other than just a commercial gallery. Also, quite frankly, I thought there were enough commercial galleries doing the work there and a whole range of commercial galleries. But I thought that in between the primary market and the secondary market, there was this gap in between these two markets. And I decided to sort of position myself in this gap. I launched Legacy, which I call a curatorial agency. I split my two interests where I work with custodians of estates. I also work with living artists. In actual fact, I work with a whole range of stakeholders. And then there's the heritage side of Legacy. That is where I do my academic research. I've just completed my master's degree and I was all fired up, and I really did not want to lose the momentum of academic research. My research was about museums in the global south. I was really interested in identity formation, national imaginaries and exhibitions, and how these exhibitions speak to or about a national imaginary. And it was also, I think it was in 2022, I went to Reunion with my husband, who's a music writer. He was attending a music festival and we were there for much longer than the festival. But so because he's interviewing musicians and he's interviewing the organizers, I was sort of left by myself and I was just enjoying the music. And I thought to myself, wow, this is really interesting. I was just observing the audience, they responded to the music. But I didn't really think much about it. It was only until I think we were in La Réunion for maybe 10 days and then we went to Mauritius. And it was only in Mauritius where I went to a number of the museums on the island, and the museums were not in a particularly good shape. Admittedly, it was after the global pandemic and the museums had all been closed and they were beginning to reopen. So there wasn't much that I could do in terms of music research. And again, I was just going with my husband to these places and listening to music. The penny dropped for me one evening. We were at this wonderful club called Enjoy, and there was a band called Rasanati Baby. And that's the moment when I realized actually on this island, music, Sega music is an identity. It shapes the identity for especially the Creole population. And Carson was writing for the Sunday Times. I think he was writing for the Sunday Times at the time. I was just sort of making notes and observing. I did not think that I would do much with my observations, but it did lead to an academic article in 2024. This Carson has just been published by a French university. It's important to also understand that you have to sort of carve out a bunch of time and say, I'm switch off my phone, I can't do anything. You know, this is the time for academic research. Then there you open up your diary and you do different things. It was interesting that when I developed the photography festival last year, when I started developing this idea, the first category I thought about was music photography. And I wanted to work with students and lots of projects with children. And then I worked with 2 international curators to fill the other categories. The idea of this music photography is it sort of bridges my 2 interests now from the academic world and photography and with music photography. And it was also another thing that happened, and there was an exhibition called Shooting Stars, and that looked at music photography. And then I had programmed a lot of events and talks and panel discussions throughout the month of September. And one of the themes was music archives. And at the end of the festival, the idea developed that we should look at a music photography archive. So once I sort of get the idea, there's not much that's going to stop me from throwing my energy behind it. But again, I must say that I was really, really lucky with the music photography archive. That day of the panel discussion, it was the 13th of September, there were a lot of people in the room, and many of them I know because through, if you work in culture in Cape Town, one knows a lot of people. And so Anne Duggan was there, and get some advice from her. And Dr. Geraldine Frislard has been wonderful in guiding this process as well of establishing a music archive. And someone like Steve Gordon, who has extensive experience in the field. So I've been lucky because they've all offered their time and guidance. My main focus remains working very closely with artists. I have this really long-term relationship with the artist Manfred Ziller, and who's going to be 87 next year. And although I published a book on his practice in about 2012, I've always wanted to do something a lot more academic with a lot of gravitas about his practice. His contribution to resistance art in the South African art world is really important. I have in my diary for 2026, I've sort of blocked out a bit of time and try and produced like a good 6,000 to 10,000 word document on his practice.
Wow.
Manfred is one of the artists that I said I'll be back. It's a long relationship, and it's very difficult, especially for him, to start a whole brand new relationship with the different galleries. We're managing to continue in some way. So that's something that is in the pipeline. And then I've also have a really long entanglement with the practice of Bruce Arnott, which is completely different. Sculpture. In 2002, I met a collector that was exclusively interested in his sculpture. The collector is still a client of mine, and I continue to work with Bruce's estate via his widow. And I also have planned a project for February and March next year. You make these investments at the beginning of your career and these long-term relationships. I've done my time within the commercial gallery structure where you're left with very little time.
Yes.
The way I've structured this business, I want to have time to do everything that I want to do. The other thing that I really enjoy doing is I do portfolio reviews. I can only do a few portfolio reviews a month because they take a lot of time. I schedule like 3 to 5 in a month, and I really enjoy doing that as well. Those portfolios would be photographic portfolios. They are not cheap. And because it's not cheap, I spend a lot of time with the material. I really invest time in each portfolio. So that's why I can't do that many a month.
Some very similar experience that I had after having my galleries, and then sort of taking a pause and realizing I can add more value somewhere else. In my case, it was on the tech side because I'd built that tech to run my galleries. In your case, it was moving back into academia, and then out of that into this new entrepreneurial space of yours that encompasses a lot of different things, but deeper and kind of more meaningful. I'd like to swing back to something that you've mentioned. I think our audience is going to be very interested in hearing kind of what it means when you mentioned national imaginaries. Could you unpack that a little bit for us? What is a national imaginary?
It's how a nation imagines themselves. In South African history, as you can imagine, the imaginary was a white imaginary. And then I chose to focus on the South African National Gallery. That was sort of my case study. I was just looking at that specific museum. My timeline was if and how the institution was able to sort of narrate a national imaginary for a transformed South Africa, a democratic South Africa. If you look at the South African National Gallery, the permanent collection, I did a lot of deep research, and it was mostly white men were made up a high percentage of that permanent collection, and very few women, very few Black women. I worked from 94 towards 2019. There was a huge shift specifically in photography, and specifically by female photographers. That was really interesting because I didn't expect that. Whereas the photography during the 1980s, it was mostly documentary photography, and it was mostly by male practitioners. It had completely shifted. The visual language had completely shifted. And to female photographers telling very personal stories, of course, identity became a very popular sort of discourse to explore. In the final analyses, I concluded that despite the fact that the state was very tight-fisted in terms of acquisition budgets, the institution had actually managed to sort of shift to a representative imaginary that was not exclusively white and male. I remember once walking into the National Gallery, I think it was in 2014, and it was an exhibition titled Brave New World. What struck me was the perspex surfaces of the photographs. It was very popular at that time to print your photograph onto perspex. It really, to me, signaled a huge shift in visual culture in our country at the time. And I was excited because I was very invested in photography, and I was very happy to see that.
That's always been my impression of you, a highly energetic person. I have to congratulate you about your photography festival, and especially the Shooting Stars. I mean, you spoke about luck, that kind of in a happenstance way, but it wasn't luck. I think you were a catalyst. You brought those people into the room. They were there because of something that you had begun. You can't obviously predict those outcomes, but you were certainly that catalyst. Just doing things like that you're passionate about and that you're driven to do, and then letting the thing unfold and picking up on what others are picking up on. And now you've created a movement around this music photography archives that'll go forward probably for years to come. A huge congratulations around that. I think it's amazing how much you do. So if you're sort of looking back at that first Cape Town Photography Festival, which you've just recently finished, you've been very frank about your own learning curve around things like AI-generated images and substrates, as you're speaking about just now, where we kind of draw the line between photograph and computer image. For curators and collection managers now facing those same questions, what are the one or two key criteria that you personally use to decide how such work should be described or printed or classified in kind of practical policies maybe that you would recommend institutions put in place so that they don't look back in 10 years and regret how they framed this moment?
This is a good discussion to have, because I wanted to work with the South Korean curator, Seok Yu. He's a practicing photographer and he's a full-time professor at a university in Seoul in photography. And Seok and I actually met on the photography circuit. He was wearing the hat of the photographer. I knew that he was very much involved in Southeast Asia with photography festivals. I told him that I wanted to have the festival theme as heritage. We started talking, let's discuss the role of AI in contemporary photography. And then we sort of went from there and decided, okay, well, because it's heritage, if one makes all these mistakes, if you look 30 years down the line, if you look back, what will you see? And I was really fascinated by that idea of looking back at a constructed heritage, a heritage that was not even heritage, this is completely constructed. And Seok then agreed that he will curate this exhibition, which we decided to call Future Heritage. As the material came in, I was working with a printer in Cape Town. The Future Heritage exhibition was one of the last folders that sort of came in with the printer, and he contacted me and said, the files have arrived and we should pop by. And then I just said, yes, sure, let's go with a Hanemühle. There were very big prints, and it's Hanemühle is a nice, robust paper. I looked at the files on a computer screen, but I wanted to see them on a satin sheen paper. Up the exhibition went, and it was only after the exhibition was installed, I went and looked at the exhibition. I think I was with Seok and I sat down and I looked at it and I realized, wow, I made such a huge mistake, because they're not photographs. They're not at all photographs. They were produced in a computer. It's a computer and language, because the artist prompts the computer, it speaks to the computer, it's language and an instrument, and then it makes these images. And I shouldn't have printed them. The similar paper that I used for the rest of the festival, I realized it in that moment, and I definitely will not make that mistake again. This kind of image should be printed on a different substrate to separate them, to say this is not photography. I had an interesting conversation this weekend with a photographer who said that should you even include this work on a photography festival? My answer was yes. I will continue to include images that was produced using a computer and language, but it should be printed on different substrate, because you can't deny the existence of artificial intelligence and its use in the photography sector. That I'm going to make sure that it looks different and that it's labeled as such.
This is such a big topic that you've just raised, and I think it's going to have lots of ramifications and discussions, and far longer than this podcast thing could be. It's so important to ask the questions, even if one hasn't explored all the possible answers and debates around it. But I love that idea of future heritage. It's so important that we think forward, and because what we're doing now will become the heritage of the future.
As long as there are artists, photographers still using analog processes, which in this festival, there were a number of photographers who participated with darkroom prints, but actually massive innovation within those processes. And Sean Wilson was definitely amongst them. It was on the 5th of September, and most of the international guests were still in Cape Town, and we went to Sean's opening. Sean had used a traditional printing process, but instead of using glass plates, he used cell phones or tablets. The screen, the exhibition on the wall, was very familiar in terms of its shape, the cell phone screen shape. And then we went for a quick tour of his darkroom and his studio, and most of the foreign guests were completely surprised and said they have not been inside a darkroom for a very long time.
Yeah. As you're mentioning it, I'm recalling back, I majored in photography for my fine arts degree, and we spent 4 years in dark rooms with chemicals, etc. And I can still, as you made me think of it now, it stimulated this scent, the smell in my memory. Yeah. It's so strange and so interesting. And I think you're right from kind of analog right through to digital, right through to beyond digital, which is kind of generative. And there's so much experimentation going on. You have to kind of embrace all of it, but then also critically look at it and say, how do we define it or give it the right space to breathe in the context of of these discussions. So they're really interesting. I also find it so interesting when you engage a community of artists and photographers and collectors, general public in these kind of festivals. You're getting those debates going, those conversations going. It's something you do particularly well. You do so many things, but so many of them are engaging with various communities. Can you share a highlight from engaging with communities?
I judge a lot of competitions. I do the critical mass photography competition every year that takes up about, I think it's about 3 weeks. I love judging that competition because it really takes one really into the medium, because these are people from across the globe who enter their work. And I always love to see the innovation in photography, but I also love doing different things that has got nothing to do with photography. And that is an award that I do every year. It's called Phenomenal Women. And it's an initiative that was launched by the Drakenstein municipality in the Paarl area. I've done that 3 times. They always bring back the same judges. We have become really good friends almost, the judges. It's women I don't know, and we come from different sectors and different areas of work. And it's just wonderful because this is an initiative where the community can nominate members within their community and to sort of qualify why they think she is a phenomenal woman. It's definitely my highlight of every year because it reminds me that people do want to do good. It's often people with very little who want to make soup kitchens and who want to help other people. It's just always incredibly rewarding for me. If you have very little, you still want to help. It's just an incredibly rewarding 2 weeks, 2 days, and that I give of my time. Sometimes it's someone who's just graduated as an engineer, or someone who's graduated as a lawyer and who immediately wants to sort of give back to the community what they have learned and what they have experienced. It's just really wonderful. I also love the approach of the initiative. There are different categories, so we usually have about maybe 20 winners because there's very many different categories. It would be wonderful if different municipalities could run out this initiative across the country, because I think it's a great initiative.
Sounds very humbling and inspiring at the same time.
Absolutely. It's very inspiring. Always come back on a real high, and because also it's often about people who've changed their lives, who sort of came from very broken homes or like histories of abuse, who've changed their lives and is now able to sort of give back to their community.
It's a kind of celebration of leadership coming from unexpected sources. In this podcast, we're always interested in the armature supporting the kind of systems and records and values that keep art and collections alive over time. And I'm thinking about that in the context of leadership as well. And drawing on your work as a curator, an art historian, and heritage specialist, what practical things do you believe leaders should put in place now, maybe around contracts or provenance or digital infrastructure or whatever it is, to safeguard artists' legacies?
When I use the word estate planning, a lot of artists, living artists, think that estate planning is something you do when your family does, and estate planning is something that you do right now. You must sort out your archive right now. Very small, simple things that in terms of categories that artists can do. I know that artists say that they're too busy with their practice and that they're not administrators and that they're not business people. So they often say, I can't sell my work. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do that, how to do whatever. But I think that to sort out your archive is really important, because then it's your voice that has created these categories. It's not done afterwards. Once an artist is deceased, and I will come in and I will sort out an archive, and then I do it the way I want to do it. But I think it's really important for artists to realize that estate planning is something that they should spend an hour a day, every day. They should do something with their archive. I think that quality in business is discipline. It's not just in business. I think that an artist is your business. Something that is crucial in an artist practice is integrity, focus, and discipline. That is very much entangled with sorting out the archive. Just from my own perspective, I often analyze risk. And I think, okay, well, should I do this festival or shouldn't I do this festival? And I sort of go through this whole process. And then I think, oh, well, I'm just going to do it. I think that there must be a sense of adventure in this journey of managing a business. That's my policy. That's my philosophy, is that there has to be this sense of adventure. I'll do nothing if I have to analyze the risk, because the risk in whatever I'm doing is really, really high, and I'll just say no and I just can't do it. I'm big on the adventure as long as there are boundaries. And I think that that's the same for artists. The idea of being an artist, it's a huge responsibility, because you're speaking, as we were talking earlier on about national imaginaries, you're sort of speaking on behalf of your peers, you're speaking on behalf of your community. It's a big responsibility. And I think that there should be some fun in there as well.
Absolutely. You speak about risk, avoiding kind of spending too much time worrying about the risk and rather going for the sense of adventure. But there's equally as much of a risk in doing nothing, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Extreme boredom or lack of achievement.
Somebody asked me, it was my idea of a successful artist. Truthfully, I think that a successful artist is someone that continues, someone that perseveres. It's someone who sometimes, even if they're not recognized and they're not making a lot of money with their art, who continues and perseveres. And then something will shift and that recognition will arrive. It's a long-term commitment that you have to make with yourself.
And you have to have a lot of grit and courage to do that perseverance and continuity. I love the leadership habits, summarizing them as leadership habits that you mentioned earlier: integrity, focus, and discipline. And then the grit to be able to keep continuing with those over a long period of time, just even when others might not be believing in yourself or you're coming across challenges, being seen or recognized, you just keep going anyway.
That's most often where you think, well, no, I'm just going to give up because I've got no money in my bank account. I've not been accepted into a residency. I haven't won this award. I'm now going to give up. The challenge is to stay and to persevere and to find the depth to continue the next day and to get beyond this little wobbly. I know it's easy for me to say that, but I have also been there. I was also a young businesswoman at the beginning of my career, and many years ago, I do remember those times where I just thought, I just can't do this anymore. It's just too stressful because there's all these balls that you have to balance. One just has to continue.
It's so true. I was interviewing the artist Heidi Erdmann, and he was saying he loves artist biographies so much because in reading them, he realizes how much of a struggle, how much of those kind of ups and downs and that grit that was required. Artists that he might kind of look at and admire and think they're a huge success, and why am I finding it so difficult? And then he reads the biographies and realizes they also had a great deal of difficulty and they just had to keep going, and there were times that they wanted to give up. So speaking of books, Heidi, do you have a book about creativity or business that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, in terms of creativity, I mean, I have a pile of books next to my bed. That was photography books that I like to dip into now and again. I have a Bertrand Russell book. No, it's so old and dated, but I love dipping in there. A couple of years ago, we went away for a weekend somewhere and I bought Magda Wierzycka's biography at a secondhand store, and I could not stop reading it. I read it before the weekend was over. I'd finished it. I could so relate to it because she's a woman and she was a mother and battles with balancing children and school. And I really like that perspective. Often the kinds of books that we read about business is often written by people like Warren Buffett. And it's like sometimes I just can't relate to it because I have a different wiring. And I really appreciated her book and how much harder it is for a woman to become successful. So yeah, I really enjoyed her book.
She built a big financial empire.
That's correct, yeah, Signia. And she also has a big art collection. So, and that's always wonderful when people do make a lot of money, that they sort of invest in the arts. So I kind of like that as well.
And you're a big advocate for female leadership in the art world too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Who gave you the best advice that ever that you still use today?
That would be Marilyn Martin. I was working at the South African National Gallery. She was the director of the National Gallery. I was her PA. I had been in a motor vehicle accident where I broke every bone in my body, and I was 6 months pregnant, and both my son and I survived. And I was incredibly broken and broken up. And I had a lot of head injuries. I kept on thinking that I was brain damaged. My accident was in 1992. In 1994, I got a position at the National Gallery. It was when I had left the National Gallery already, and I was managing my galleries. I used to often go and visit Marilyn, and I would often sort of arrive in tears and ask her for advice, and she gave me really good advice. I still practice that until today. That is, choose your battles, and if it's not a battle to pursue, put it aside, move on. That's very sound advice. She was really supportive of women in business and balancing family life with business. Herself, a mother and single mother. It's an incredible quality to have. Yeah, and I appreciated that of her, to understand who I was, a young mother, balancing my family life and trying to be successful.
How wonderful to have that kind of mentor that you could go to in any state. Tap into that wisdom. In terms of business, what business advice would you give your 20-year-old self if you could go back?
Well, my 20-year-old self, that's a bit difficult because I was still at university, and then I was traveling, and then I came back. But I think that when I look back at my life, I wish that someone had told me that, Heidi, invest in good clothing, like a uniform, like Monday to Friday black uniform, good quality linen. Just have this in your cupboard. I wish someone had told me that. Invest in good clothing, yeah, because it sort of gives one confidence. I work with the artist Manfred Zoller. I always say to him, but it's incredible how these works have aged so well. And he says, I use good quality paper and good quality materials. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say. That's the advice that I have. Invest in, if you work in the art world, in a good black uniform.
I think that's so valid today. I'm thinking about myself. I work most of the time from my home office. My company is entirely remote, always has been. And somebody once said to me, why do you dress up every day? I'd popped out, they'd seen me, they're like, you look like you've come from the office. I know that you work from home. Why do you do that? And it's that sense of confidence and purpose and place that the clothing gives you. It's about you half the time, right? More than half the time.
Absolutely. My husband always laughs at me because I say to him that I have an online meeting in the next 15 minutes. And he says, but why are you wearing perfume? And I say, it just works for me. I get dressed, I put my lipstick on, I put my perfume on, and then I log on to my computer, and I just feel more prepared, I guess. I know it's quite silly, but I just feel more prepared in some way.
Interesting. If you were an artwork, which one would you be and why?
If I was an artwork, which would I be and why? I'll definitely be a photograph, and it would be definitely a Japanese photographer. That is what I would be. I have this friend, and we used to meet up for Art Basel in Hong Kong. And at the start, on the preview days, we would give one another these imaginary checks for $1 million. So on the preview day, we speak German to one another because I'm German and she speaks German. So we are these two women walking around with imaginary $1 million check in our handbag, speaking German. And both of us always blew both 2 million. We spent it always just on photography, and they were mostly Japanese photographers. So yeah, definitely.
I love that. I can imagine how walking around the fair just normally would feel, and how walking around the fair, even if it's a fake $1 million check, how that would just add fun and fantasy to the whole experience. What a wonderful idea.
The shipping would stand in front of someone, and then I would say to her in German, but you don't have enough money. And she'll look at me and she'll say, what's the point of one photograph, one at the series? And yeah, it was great fun. We did it every year when we went. And every year we sort of left with our photographs. And yeah, it was fun. You and I can do it at this. We won't have $1 million. Let's give ourselves a smaller amount, but for the next Cape Town Art Fair, why don't you and I do?
That is a deal.
Okay, great.
And a good wardrobe.
Yes, okay. Good wardrobe. And shall we give ourselves 500,000 Rand? And then let's see what we're going to buy. That's fantastic, Tamsin. I'm
500,000 Rand and a stunning outfit. You and I at Cape Town Art Fair in February. It's a deal.
I've missed doing that.
I'm up for that.
Thank you so much.
Werner, our producer, he's the head of Otfundi Media Lab. He is obviously recording this. So Werner, if you wouldn't mind, keep a note of that and challenge us, remind us that we have to do it. And now we'll send you as our photographer to paparazzi. Werner can be our paparazzi. Follow us around, see what we buy, and we'll share that with everybody.
At least just to keep account of all the millions you're buying.
Exactly. Deal. I could talk to you all evening, but we need to wrap it up. That has been so much fun. I told everyone at the beginning they would be stimulated by this conversation. So thank you so much, Heidi, for joining us. We will reconnect at the Cape Town Art Fair. We'll put that in our diaries and we will swing back to everybody that's following this podcast and share some photos and some artworks that we buy at the show.
Yes. Bye-bye.
That's the show. I'm Tamsin Lovell and this has been Taller Together. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.